وأحسن القائلين وأصدق الصادقين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين لله شهداء بالقسط ولا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على أن لا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected sisters and brothers, Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم. Today, if we were to ask ourselves, what is one of the main problems that exist around the planet other than the crisis that we are going through associated with the health of people and the spread of the virus? Perhaps people will come across and talk about extremism, terrorism, killings, unemployment, and so on. Others may say poverty. But it seems to be that according to studies and polls that have been conducted around different countries, one of the biggest challenges that faces mankind is actually corruption. And this serves to highlight the importance of the subject of justice and just values in society and its impact upon human beings. Of course, justice is deemed as a universal concept, sought and desired by all human beings throughout history of mankind. Despite extensive discussions surrounding the nature and reality of justice by philosophers such as Plato and Socrates, we find that the simple reflection points to seeking justice and establishing truth are actually intrinsic in every human being. For example, if you look at a child who's given a toy to play with or some food, then it's actually taken away, they cry, they're unhappy. No one taught the child, for example, that this is wrong, but they know that this is something that is unacceptable because something that was with them has been forcefully removed from them. We also find that, for example, if a group of thieves steal, they would want to distribute everything evenly amongst themselves. So they would want to act through justice, even though they are committing that which is wrong. Some, therefore, have suggested that justice is the basis of all moral virtues in society. If you want trustworthiness, you have to seek justice. If you want truthfulness, it's because of justice. If you want generosity, then you have to establish justice. And similarly, oppression and injustice seem to be the basis for all vice and evil. Stealing, backbiting, killing, all stem from, indeed, injustice. Islam, therefore, is a religion that's based on justice and moderation. And its teachings are very much center staged on this important concept. It places emphatic emphasis on seeking the truth and actually adala. Why? Because when you think about it, the most important belief is tawheed, monotheism. And justice stems from this. Since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually just, people are commanded to establish adala in all forms and levels in society. We examine the Holy Quran and we find there are over 30 references to this important principle, which highlight the center position of justice in Islamic teachings. Let's look at two, for example. In Surah Al-Hadid, verse number 25, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْمِيزَانِ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. Why were the prophets sent? Well, the Quran says to establish justice. Qist is used here as adl. You know, in the Quran, they both used interchangeably. But it is the people who need to carry this, not the Anbiya by themselves. Because the Anbiya, the prophets, they give guidelines. You know, they are role models, they're exemplary, but people need to follow. That's why the verse says, أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلُنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْمِيزَانِ, so that people establish justice. You look at Surah Al-Nahl, verse number 90. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى. This verse is recited in Jum'ah khutbahs, isn't it? 90% of our problem, my sisters and brothers, if we implement this verse, will be solved. Allah commands that people rule with justice, ihsan. Observing justice is a precursor to human development and ascension, spirituality, morally, physically, economically. Success is based on the principle of adala. That's why within the school of Ahl al-Bayt, being just is a condition for some roles in Islamic society, like for example, leading prayers, leading Salatul Jumu'ah, like for example, to be a witness, to be a judge, to be a marja' al-taqleed. So what is the actual definition, therefore, of justice? In Arabic it says, وَضْعُ الشَّيْءِ فِي مَوْضَعِهِ أو إعطاء ذي حق حقه, to place something in its rightful place or to give people their rights. Emphasis of the justice is greater in the school of Ahl al-Bayt, since it's considered a principle of Aqidah. It's part of Usuluddin, part of the Adliya, the theological discussions, opposed to the Ash'arites. We believe that God is just, and whoever whatever it is established is part of his justice. But unfortunately, other schools of thought, like Ash'ari, say no, God is just, but therefore whatever he does is okay, so he could take the good people to hell. Those who believe in God's justice say no. There is a concept known as al-husn wal-qubh al-aqliyan, intrinsic good and evil. Aql dictates what is right and wrong, of course in direction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands. That is why the Prophet and the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam were the best examples of administering justice. It was not only that they preached it, but also practicing it. And there has to be something like that. There had to be the demonstration of justice in terms of exemplary people, so that people would learn, so that people would benefit, so that people would take them indeed as role models and apply what they did in their lives. Let's look at the examples from the life of the Holy Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Truly his justice stood out as the best, and he was indeed the best. There was a story that once a lady stole after the conquest of Mecca, and she was from a well-known rich aristocratic family. The Prophet of Islam actually punished her for stealing, and the people objected. And the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, well, previous nations, they were destroyed because they were just only with the poor, but not with the rich. The Prophet of Islam come forward and say, don't treat the people differently. There are rules, there are regulations, there has to be adala in this way. And that's why a famous statement from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is, a moment of justice is better than 70 years of worship. This is found in Jami' al-Sa'adat. Because, ibadah based on injustice does not go much. But adala is what the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the heavens and has made emphatic emphasis upon. Now, the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace and blessings be upon him and his holy family, became the inspiration and role model for all those seeking justice amongst the human beings. But of course, amongst the greatest of those who learned from the justice of the Holy Prophet was none other than his brother and closest companion, a man labeled by non-Muslims as the voice of human justice, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. Now, if you examine the illustrious life of the commander of the faithful and you read his statements and sermons in Nahju Balagha, you will be left with no position but to admire his relentless work and emphasis on all aspects, dimensions and levels of adala and justice. And hence you find the likes of people like Khalil Gibran mentioning that Ali ibn Abi Talib was killed in his mihrab because of his intense justice. This was a Christian author. Ibn Athir says, when you look at the life of Ali, his justice and his zuhud, his asceticism, you cannot separate it from his life. They are inseparable. This historian who's not a Shia. Now, George Jordak in his book, The Voice of Human Justice, and this man, of course, was fully in love with Ali ibn Abi Talib. His life was dedicated towards at least understanding Ali and writing about him, and he was full of admiration for Amir al-Mu'mineen. Despite being a Christian author, a man who is an Arab poet and a linguist, but he was mesmerized by Nahjul Balagha and of course wrote his famous 5-volume book in Arabic, and later it's available in English, and perhaps there are over 1 million copies that have been sold. He died a few years ago. And you realize that when he goes through, for example, the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says some wonderful things, regarding what Amir al-Mu'mineen actually stood for and what he actually achieved. And reflection on the words of the non-Muslims actually give us a very interesting dimension, because this is Amir al-Mu'mineen who is talked about by non-Muslims in such a manner, which highlights whom he was and the realization of what he sought to actually achieve in his life. The words of the likes of George Jordak resonate greatly with us because we know him. And so he would say that in his book, in my opinion, the son of Abu Talib was the first Arab man who was in company with the human spirit. Imam Ali was martyred for his glory. He was killed while he was uttering the prayer on his lips, and he demised with a heart full of love towards God. Arabs did not recognize his true dignity and status, since some people from the Persian neighbor rose who distinguished the gem from the pebble well. Now, what he says about the justice is, he says he was killed in his altar for his justice. And the Christian author continues by saying, yes, Ali, as the Imam of righteousness and goodness, has remained akin to a mighty mountain throughout history, so that even traumatic events and fierce winds could not shake it. And so on. He is like a bright flame in the heart, an exhilarating warmth in souls, and a remedial logic in intellects. And the praise continues in this book that's certainly very worthy and recommended for you and I to obtain. Let's look at a few examples from the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, which points to his adala. Once the Sahabi of the Holy Prophet Abu Huraira once went to the Holy Prophet and said, I need some help because I'm hungry, can you give me some food? So the Prophet of Islam gave him a certain amount of dates. And whilst he left the Prophet, he met Amir al-Mu'mineen and asked him the same thing, and Amir al-Mu'mineen also gave him a certain amount of dates. So when he went back, he looked at the dates and somehow they looked very similar in number, so he counted them and they were exactly 73. So he went back to the Holy Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, you gave me 73 dates and Ali gave me 73 dates. How is this possible? This is narrated by Allama Suyuti, who is of course a Shafi'i non-Shia scholar. The Prophet of Islam said to him, Ama alimta anna yadi wa yadu aliyan fil adli sawa'. Don't you know that my hands and the hands of Ali in justice is the same? And this was demonstrated throughout the life of the Holy Prophet, as well as after the Prophet of Islam left this world. Sheikh Al-Kulayni, Sheikh Al-Tusi, and other ulama, they narrate the story that at the time of the Khilafah of the second Khalifa Umar ibn al-Khattab, a man came to him and said, rule between me and my mom. He says, why? Because she says I'm not her mom, his mom, and I don't know you, and I know that she's my mother, but she wants nothing to do with me. So he asked her, do you swear that you don't know him? She says, yes, he wants to humiliate me. I don't know him. And Umar said to her, okay, do you have any witnesses? She said, yes, 4 brothers. They all gave witness that this man is lying. He is not the son. This lady has nothing to do with him. And at that moment, the second Khalifa ordered for him to be put in prison and then lashed. On the way for this to happen, he saw Amir al-Mu'mineen. What a man to see, no doubt. He saw Imam Ali alayhi salam on the way, and he said to him, you know, what a sight, I'm relieved to see you. He said, please help me. So Imam said, very well. He took him back to the place where the second Khalifa was and said to him, do you accept what I say? So the Khalifa said, yes, of course, I bear witness that, I will accept. At that moment, Imam Ali alayhi salam looked at this man and this woman and said, I hereby marry this lady to this man for 400 dirhams. And he had asked Qambar to go and get it from the house. And he said, that's it, take your wife and go. At that moment, the woman started to scream, An-nar, An-nar. Oh, the cousin of Muhammad, you want me to marry my own son? I was lying, I was forced to marry, and these brothers of mine have told me to leave my husband, and he was born, and so I had to lie. He is truly my son. And this is where the second Khalifa said, Lawla Ali lahalaka Umar. If it wasn't for Ali, Umar would have perished. So the idea that emerges that there are these examples during his Khilafah, of course, the famous story of the two women who disputed, they said this particular child is from me, and the other one said, no, it's mine. And so Imam said, let's cut the child in two, you have half and the other one has half. And the real mother said, no, I cannot bear that. So Imam said, you must be the real mother, because you will not want to see your son cut into two pieces. But the justice and the adala of Amir al-Mu'mineen was greatly manifested when he actually was allowed to rule and he became a Khalifa. History tells us one of the first things he did was that he gave 3 dinars to each person. He didn't necessarily do survey of this person from this family or this background or whatever. He gave the same to people. Then Amr ibn al-As, this individual, came to him and objected to this and said, what is this? You give us the same as everyone else. Imam alayhi salam said, everything distributed wrongly from Baytul Mal, I will get it back. Even if it's used for marriage, I will correct it. He says, if it was mine, I will distribute it equally. How about if it's Allah's? You expect me to deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wealth. It belongs to him. So I have to act with justice. I have to act with righteousness. When he would distribute, for example, loaves of bread that were received somehow, he would cut it exactly the same and give it out to the tribes. When there was the story of the shield that was taken by a man who is Jewish faith, and Imam Ali alayhi salam said, this is mine, and then they went to the judge, Shurayh al-Qadi, and Shurayh al-Qadi said, do you have witnesses? And Imam bought Amir al-Mu'mineen, bought Imam al-Hasan and Hussein, and bought Qambar, and of course they were rejected. And Imam said, very well, that's it. This man said, I can't believe it. How can you be the ruler and yet you would accept the ruling of the judge just like this? It is amazing. So he witnessed firsthand how Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen wanted to ensure that this equity and this adala would be implemented. In Nahjul Balagha, these sermons that are present, they all speak of the principles of justice and equity that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam wanted you and I to learn from and to understand and to reflect whilst we are commemorating these nights that belong to the commander of the faithful. How desperate are we in a world that is filled with injustice and corruption, all these vices, to learn from our master and our Mawla and to apply it into our lives. How desperate are we to think and introspect and reflect on what awaits us, and how we could be the true followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen in order to make sure that we are resurrected with him, and how much of his justice can we reflect in our own lives. Look at this sermon 228 of Nahjul Balagha. He says, I prefer to have sleepless nights over sharp thorny plants than meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet Yawm al-Qiyamah as a tyrant who persecuted anyone or a usurper who seized property. Why should I tyrannize or exploit somebody for comfort on the body which is going to decay? And he says, he has this wonderful line where he says, by Allah, if I'm given whatever's in the 7 continents and whatever's inside it, so that I will take a small amount of barley from the back of an ant, I would never do so. This is the taqwa of Ali ibn Abi Talib, which of course shaped his justice. Now, having appreciated all this in remembrance of Amir al-Mu'mineen, we need to look at ourselves. We need to be just with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, haqqullah. We need to be just with people. We need to be just with ourselves, haqqul nafs. My wajibat, when I commit sins continuously and I'm careless, reckless, I don't care, I'm oppressing myself. So I'm not practicing justice with myself to start off with. When I'm watching the haram, listening to the haram, going and associating with people who I'm not supposed to, dealing with people based on ego and speaking ill about them and spreading false stuff about them, or ghiba or namima, or slander. That is dhulm. Now with people, am I observing social justice? Am I observing the rights of others? Because remember, justice with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should govern everything. I should not be deceitful. I should not be somebody who cheats. I should not be a part-time adherer of faith and the lover of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But this idea of implementing adala and justice in our lives wholeheartedly, completely, for it to become second nature, unfortunately sometimes is difficult. It's painful. It results in loss. It results in us giving up things. Example, there is the inheritance battles that sometimes happen. And I know that I shouldn't be fighting this. And I know I've been told by an alim that, by the way, this is how much you're entitled to. But maybe the law of the land gives me more. And I'm thinking I'm going to fight that at the expense of my brothers because I need this money. But where is the adala? For example, between husband and wife, sometimes there is grave injustices occurring between them and how they treat each other. Or God forbid, when they separate, one is trying to destroy the other. One is trying to bring the other down and tarnish their reputation in society, for example. Or if there is an alim or a speaker or a public figure or somebody in the community that we dislike or we've had a disagreement with, there are people who have vendettas and agendas to try and tarnish their reputation, character assassinate them. Where are we from the justice of Amir al-Mu'mineen? Where are we from what we ought to be doing with our family members, with our children, with our parents, with our cousins, with our brothers and sisters within the community? So remember, in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I need to look at, now someone might say, how do I know? Maybe I am trying to be just, but I don't know whether I am being zalim. I don't know whether I'm taking the rights of others. And that's why it's important to give what's known as raddul mazalim constantly, just in case we are being unjust to others and we don't know. And inshallah, at least some of the impact can be lessened and reduced. But at the same time, asking for istighfar and forgiveness and asking others, have I taken any of your rights? Have I done anything wrong to you? Please forgive me. That kind of spirit is very good, because it will be greatly beneficial for us on the day of Qiyamah, and as well as in this world, because there are sins that unfortunately block the dua from reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in actual fact from being answered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And maybe, me having oppressed somebody and their hearts are broken because of me could be one of the reasons my hajat is not being fulfilled. And as individuals who are desperately awaiting the reappearance of our 12th Imam, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah, we know that he's the Imam of justice. يَمْلَأُ الْأَرْضَ قِسْطًا وَعَدْلًا. The first thing that is mentioned about Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman is spreading equity and the principles of justice. Equity means people are treated fairly, but differently, taking into consideration their different circumstances. That's why we have gender equity. It's a better term to use than sometimes when we talk about gender equality, for example. But without necessarily going into that, we are the ones who have pledged allegiance to Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. And in order for the government of Imam Mahdi, which is based on justice, to be formed, and for him, when we say Allahumma ajjil li waliyika al-faraj, that tongue that I'm asking for the reappearance to happen quickly, that I want to be of those who serve the Imam, that heart, that body needs to be seeking to implement justice on this world. It needs to be working very hard to be doing the right thing and to stand against dhulm and injustice. There is so much happening around the world that is oppression. Maybe because of COVID-19 or the situation, alhamdulillah, there are oppressors who have kind of pressed the pause button in their lives. But the moment things will go back to how they were gradually, then we will see the continuation of the shedding of the blood, of the usurping of people's rights and lands and property, and the killing of innocent individuals, and the concentration camps and the torture and so on and so forth. We mustn't stay silent. We must do whatever it takes, because that's what our Imams alayhim salam did. And that is why when Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, peace and blessings be upon him, was going through the final moments of his life, he would give advice to people, those who came towards him, those who asked him, those who wanted help and support. He would give advice. And one of the things he did as well was to give strength and encouragement and ask patience for the calamities that would befall upon the Ahl al-Bayt, from the likes of Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, and of course Sayyida Zainab, salamullahi alayha. You know, that heart of Sayyida Zainab, what did it see? It saw her mother crushed between the wall and the door. It saw Amir al-Mu'mineen's head split into two. It saw the liver of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam being vomited out. It saw Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alone on the plains of Karbala, his head on a spear, his body crushed under the hoofs of the horses, the women chained and beaten. It saw the arrow in the neck of Ali al-Asghar. It saw the arrow in the eyes of Abbas and the severing of the arms of Abbas. It saw Awn and Muhammad return back as lifeless bodies torn into pieces. Likewise for Ali al-Akbar and al-Qasim. It saw Habib and Muslim ibn Awsaja and Burayr and other shuhada rushing towards Jannah. It saw all the pain and the suffering. That is why Amir al-Mu'mineen on his final moments would place the hand of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas on the hand of Sayyida Zainab. Somehow, according to the narration, to try and say that, you know what, oh Abbas, look after Zainab. And how brilliantly did he do. And how much Zainab missed Abbas. How much Zainab wanted Abbas. The narrations tell us that every time she would remember Abu Abdullah al-Hussein on this journey, you know, she would feel that missing perhaps of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. And on that eve of Sham Ghariba, that difficult night, she saw a dream. She went to sleep for a few moments. She saw that one of the orphans of Imam al-Hussein had gone missing. So she went out to the battlefield. She saw a man on his horse, fully covered. She could not recognize who he was. He was carrying this orphan of Abu Abdullah. She came next to this man and said, "Oh man, may Allah reward you on the day of Qiyamah. Hadihi yatimatul Hussein. This is the orphan of Abu Abdullah." And that man dismounted from his horse, placed the child on the ground, looked up to Zainab and says, "My daughter, do you not recognize your father Ali? I am your loving father Ali ibn Abi Talib." Zainab begins to cry and weep, "Father, Father Ali, don't blame me. If only you saw what I saw on the day of Ashura. I saw the severed hands, I saw the severed heads, I saw the bodies being crushed under the hooves of the horses. I saw the children crying out, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. But, O Father Ali, one sight broke my heart," according to the poet, that when this wretched man walked towards Abu Abdullah, when he had the dagger in his hands, and he sunk his knees on the chest of Hussein, and when he looked on the face of Abu Abdullah, that sight, and what a sight that broke the heavens and the earth. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين وإنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Ya Allah, grant us tawfiq and success to establish justice wherever we are in every aspect of our lives. بحق أمير المؤمنين. These are nights of the month of Ramadan. They will encapsulate our hearts. They will motivate us. This is where our hajat, inshallah, are fulfilled. Let's pray to Allah on a night like this and on the nights of Qadr to be able to attain justice in all our aspects of our lives, including our speech, our conduct, in our interactions with others. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala